Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, each day we leave a trail of digital breadcrumbs as we walk through our lives. Can we trust the government to use the information it collects on us for our safety, or are we losing our right to privacy? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Dan Boylan. Do we take our privacy for granted? In an era where we post pictures of our lunches on Facebook and we jump from website to website throughout the day, do we really care that the government is secretly tracking our digital footprints? The government says it takes these steps for our protection, something that, according to a 2013 Pew Research Center report, 56% of us say is an acceptable means for government to investigate terrorism. And isn't it justifiable that the government tracks our digital communications when we so willingly leave a trail? How do we protect our privacy? Do our lawmakers need to spell out our rights in legislation as we go forward in the digital age? You can join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. The contact information you now see on your screen will be repeated throughout the program. Insights is also streaming live on your computer and will be posted on our website after the broadcast. The live stream is closed caption, just like our broadcast. Now to our panel. Burt Lum is co-host of Hawaii Public Radio's Bytemarks Café and executive director of Hawaii Open Data. Last week, Governor Abercrombie signed an open data bill that Burt helped write. The new law makes government data more accessible to the public. Burt has more than 30 years in Hawaii's technology and communications sector. Jeff Portnoy is a First Amendment attorney who represents many of the big media organizations in Hawaii and last session opposed the so-called Steven Tyler Act. He is a partner in the law firm Cade Schutte, chairs the firm's litigation department, and has practiced law as a civil litigator. Sorry, Jeff. Since 1972. Chris Duque is recognized as one of Hawaii's leading computer and internet crimes investigators. He spent 30 years in the Honolulu Police Department, retiring in 2007. While with HPD, he was assigned to the Criminal Investigation Division White-Collar Crime Unit, where he specialized in cybercrime investigations and computer forensics. I got through that, but I couldn't get through the litigator. He recently agreed to work for the Honolulu Prosecutor's Office. Ed Case represented Hawaii in Congress from 2003 to 2006, where he voted in favor of extending the Patriot Act and making it permanent. During his 2012 bid for the United States Senate, Ed explained his position on civil rights, saying that it's important to give the government the tools it needs to prevent terrorism, whether it's investigating, surveying, or wiretapping, as long as there are checks and balances in place to prevent abuses. Well, I'm going to start on the lawyer side of the table tonight, and the rest of us can take a rest, with a simple question, namely, where is our right to privacy written into the Constitution or into any other body of law? Jeff, you want to start with that?
Well, it's not in the Constitution. You can read every word and you won't find a right to privacy in the Bill of Rights or anywhere else. It was created by the United States Supreme Court starting in the 1920s and then going up to the present. Basically, several of the justices believe that when you combined all the other rights in the so-called penumbra of the Bill of Rights, there was a right to privacy. The most famous case that established the right to privacy was a birth control case, Griswold versus Connecticut, and that I believe was in the 50s or the early 60s. And since that time, there's no question now that most judges believe there is a constitutional right to privacy. Now in Hawaii, it actually has a constitutional provision that came out of the Constitutional Convention establishing a right to privacy. Unfortunately, neither the framers of that amendment nor the legislature since has figured out exactly what it means, and we can talk about that later. So there is a constitutional right to privacy within the state of Hawaii in our state constitution. You won't find it in the federal constitution, but it's been created primarily by the Supreme Court.
Would you add anything to that, Ed?
Now, it's a very good explanation. I would also, though, say that in the common law of our country and our state, there is some recognition of privacy rights. There is for example, a tort that has a wonderful name to it. It's called intrusion on seclusion. And it is recognized as a claim, a right that you can sue somebody for. So, for example, whether there's something in the Constitution or not, if you put a camera in my bathroom, I can sue you for having done that, and I can try to recover damages from you for intruding on my privacy. So there has been for a long, long time, hundreds, thousands of years, a recognition that we as human beings have a zone of privacy that we are entitled to. And that has been now recognized as part of our Constitution. And as Jeff points out, we have been one of the leaders in the country in terms of recognizing that on a more basic level. And of course, the key question here is, what does that mean today in an information age? And where is our zone of privacy today? That's really what this comes down to.
And where is our zone of privacy, Burt Lum, in the world that you and your tech guys are creating?
So, in terms of where your privacy is, in terms of a digital world, it now extends way beyond that sort of physical zone of privacy. And what we're kind of moving into is this world of, you have the sort of the atoms, right? And you have your journal and you write it in a book and it's all physical. But now with electrons, that starts to extend that reach way beyond that physical zone. So we're having to really kind of redefine what it is that we consider private, because we're moving from a physical world into more of an electronic world.
So how, and where do you see it going? Where do you see that redefinition going?
Well, I think that's why it's great that we're having conversations like this, because when you create let's say a physical thing like a journal or a book, or you're writing a letter, that's a physical thing and you can sort of get your hands on it and see it. When you write an email and then now send it off to somebody else, right, that becomes a digital asset. Now, is it still private? You still basically done the same thing, but it's in the, in the world of a digital framework. And now you've typed it in, into Google Mail, Gmail, you sent it to your friend. It's basically the same kind of a paradigm of writing
which
something.
Which he can then forward to wherever he wants to.
Right. So in the physical world, I mean, you could still take somebody's letter that you got and Xerox it and post it up on a public wall.
Which I've seen people do.
Right. And that may be considered an invasion of privacy. In the digital world, you could take an email and copy it or resend it out somewhere else. So again, it's we're kind of getting into this whole new paradigm.
Playing devil's advocate there, Burt, if the letter is addressed to me, it becomes my personal property, and it's for me to do whatever I please, and to make it public to the entire world, even though it's intentionally you wrote it to me to be a private conversation, I make the decision to publicize that. Mm-hmm. So and that affects your privacy.
The interesting thing is the technology, which I know nothing about, is completely outpacing the law. But the definition hasn't changed. It's very simple. It's reasonable expectation of privacy. That's it. For every case in which there's a claim of privacy having been invaded, the test comes down to, does the fact finder, the judge, the jury, whoever is looking at whether someone's privacy has been invaded, did that person have a reasonable expectation of privacy? In the digital age, that has changed dramatically, with people posting on Facebook their every activity, tweeting every 15 seconds as to where they are in relationship to their automobile. That's changed over the last 10 years.
Back to what Jeff is saying. For instance, in law enforcement, when I first started doing cyber investigations back in the late 80s, we were governed by the Electronic Communication Privacy Act of 1986, which afforded protective rights to email. And we needed a court order issued, and we need probable cause to show that we can examine that piece of document and email. But again, too, even though we're required by law to do that, law enforcement, not say unfortunately, is human-based. Human error, and we all we have our vulnerabilities. So even though the law says we cannot do that, law enforcement cannot do that, government cannot do that, government is still run by people. People make mistakes, and they may abuse those powers.
But it is going back to Jeff's point and to what you're just talking about, it is the reasonable expectation of privacy that is eroding, I think, personally, because I have an expectation of privacy, but the expectation of the zone out of from my personal self about where my expectation extends to is a lot smaller than it used to be.
Yeah.
There's a lot more information about me out there. I mean, can I expect anymore that my medical records are private? I sure hope so. But hey, maybe they're not anymore.
To the point of, in terms of privacy, in the case of an email, if you've written an email, and let's say you've received an email and you're in a very emotional state, and you respond to that email in a way that perhaps shouldn't be publicized, you have in the expectation of a sort of a contract with the person that you're sending it to, that they won't reveal it because you think that you're sending a one-way.
But that's a social contract.
Right, a social contract.
That's a social
between
contract.
the two of
Right,
us.
but the thing is,
if you send me an email and I publicize it, that's out into the public domain.
Right.
There's no reasonable expectation
That's
of
right,
privacy. I might be able to sue you for it or claim damages, but let's use your example. You and I send an email to each other, and nobody else sees that email. Mm-hmm. Do we have a reasonable expectation of privacy as to that email? Can we protect the privacy of that email today? And what is government's right to get that information?
So, between the two of us, and we want to just send private information or private email, we can encrypt the email. There's various forms of encryption that I could send you an encrypted email.
What if I don't encrypt it? What if I just send you an email and I trust you and you trust me and we don't reveal that email
And you
to
folks
anybody?
both expect some privacy.
We both expect that email to be private. Can anybody get
Then
it?
the government-
I expect that
Government
email
will
is
need
going
a
to be
court
private.
order to examine the email.
Well, that's the point.
Professor
right there.
Portnoy.
I was going to say, Dan, the problem is the technology has outpaced a person's belief that their activities or communications are not being hijacked. I'm sorry, but that's what's going on. Hijacked either by a computer company or Google or Microsoft or the government. You used to be able to be pretty well able to figure out what's being hijacked. I mean, if you send a letter through the mail, you pretty well figured it was only going to the person you sent it to. Yeah. Now when you send it out into cyberspace with the government having all the ability it has to steal it, either from Microsoft or Google, you guys know far more about it. I don't even know how to tweet. I didn't even know the word the other day, I got it wrong. But that's the problem. So then the question becomes, as we're talking about, knowing that if I put it out into cyberspace, there's all these ways that technology can take it and give it to someone I didn't intend. Am I complicit, and do I lose my reasonable expectation by putting it out there in the first place?
Why shouldn't we? I mean, when I think about all the credit card numbers, when I purchase something, my name and address, when I sign up for a new organization or something that I'm throwing out there on the internet. And then there are websites where you can get my name, my wife's name, how many kids I got, what our address is. If you just know the town, Honolulu, you can get a lot of stuff. You pay money, then you can get even more information.
To that point, when you do put your credit card number onto, let's say, a site like Amazon, there is an expectation. You have an expectation that Amazon is not going to release that data. Now, when they have hacks and people get hacked into the servers, and then you can get people's social security numbers, you feel like you've been vandalized, right? You've been compromised. Now, but there is an expectation. So when companies like Amazon, and they have this contract of keeping your information private, you have a trust level. So that trust level is something that you maintain with those companies. Now, if those companies start to, let's say they are in collusion with the NSA, and they have made a contract to give out, allow them to sniff the wire, then your trust level with those companies starts to diminish. And that's unfortunately where we're headed.
As computer guys, as guys and people have studied it or in it, were you surprised when Edward Snowden said that the NSA, right? NSA, excuse me, that the NSA was tapping into this stuff? Were you surprised?
No, not at all.
And why not?
Well, being in the
Because he does it every day.
True, I do it every day. Not on my official office, however.
That's right.
Human nature, like I said, going back to human nature. One of the things I also caution when I do my presentation on cyber safety, cybersecurity, is that I may be a service provider, but I'm still human. You know, you come to me, you give me your data. There's a trust, like Burt said, there's a trust that you trust me. But that trust can be tainted. Somebody can threaten my family. I may need the money, you know, funding. Somebody may offer me some information, some value to the information that I have. But just because you give me information, there's an expectation that I won't misuse the information. And that's why, you know, you see on these fine prints when you go to terms of service, you know, you look to see, okay, I'm going to put in my social security number, my address, my email address, my wife's name, my kids' names, birthday. You need to read the fine print to see what they're going to do with the information. Are they going to sell it to a competitor? Are they going to share it on the internet? Not many people go down to the small print. I always joke and say that those small prints should be big, bold letters at the very top of every web page or when you sign up. But no, it's on the bottom in some small micro font.
That's very active lobbying by information companies out there, because this is huge business. This is billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of business now in this information age, is about collecting and selling information. And I tell you, they got their hooks into legislature. And frankly, you're going to very rarely see that kind of consumer disclosure saying, you know, put it in, you know, huge type on the front of the thing. It's going to be buried down there.
Information is a new commodity.
I think the more sinister thing, and you brought up Snowden, and the amount of private information that's being sold that we have no idea about. The sinister thing is the hypocrisy and the secrecy. I think what makes Snowden so intriguing, and you can argue whether he's committed a crime or not and should be brought to justice. I don't intend to delve into that. But you have to understand that it's the government that created the Snowden situation by its constant lies about what it's doing, either before Congress or before the media. Just weeks before Snowden, the representatives of the government testifying before Congress denied outright that they were making any attempt to secure and or listen to cellular phone conversations. The cellular phone companies have not been totally honest. And I think if the government would say, listen, every time you use your cell phone, we want you to know that you're taking the risk that we may, for whatever reason, listen. One, people might not use it, I understand that, but two, at least they would understand. But the constant denials of government and industry that get exposed have led to, I think, the hypocrisy that really needs to be exposed by someone like Snowden, even if he's committed a crime and should pay for it.
Well, I think
You were nodding, so you're getting cold.
He signed a Patriot Act.
you asked a very important question. Were you surprised when you found out about what the government was doing? And I have to say, I was very sadly not surprised. And here's the real key here. I have an expectation of privacy in my cell phone records, first of all. I mean, and in my cell phone conversations. Now, going back thousands of years, the deal has been this. I have that expectation of privacy, and if you, government, want to look at my private stuff, you have to go through certain hoops to get to my private stuff. And you have to have some reasonable suspicion that I'm doing something wrong.
Like the secrecy court that
You
hasn't
cannot-
rejected the government one time.
Exactly. You can't, and courts use this phrase, go on a fishing expedition. The law enforcement is not supposed to say, oh, well, look at this great group sitting around the table here. Well, we wonder whether there's anything going wrong. We're going to look at all their records. We're going to invade every single privacy right they have. And oh, by the way, if we find out some lead, maybe we're going to use it. That's not the way the system's supposed to work. That was my disappointment in what happened. We have a system in place to be able to handle law enforcement's right to go after the privacy records of people in the terrorism or other contexts, and that system broke down. That's my belief on it. That's what's so sad about this. A system of checks and balances, you talked about that earlier, was built into our laws, built in, and it's based on constitutional principles.
But
And it seems to me that that failed. They are on a big old fishing expedition.
Doesn't it go to Jeff's point, however, that court, that group of judges that have to serve on that court, right, that makes the decision whether you can look at these patterns or use this information, they've essentially said yes to everything, right?
It seems, unless the government is ignoring that court and actually doing something illegal, which I don't think is the case, what is evidently happened is that that court has authorized the government to go on fishing expeditions. That's the problem here.
Yeah.
Well, it's like going before the grand jury is all I'm saying. I mean, the prosecutor
It used
goes
to be.
before the grand
Right.
jury. There's no one representing the other side. The jury hears one side.
Right.
This secrecy court, the government goes with whatever petition they file. There's no one opposing it, and it's going to get
To
granted.
get the information that Snowden we've got in law enforcement, we needed a search warrant or subpoena or both. And we had to bring, you have to have develop probable cause and take it to a magistrate who will examine the facts that we have to issue the court order. And it's very specific at what we can look at and, and the time period. In this case, the government they were scot-free to do whatever they want, and, again,
It's hard to argue that people have a reasonable expectation of privacy when every 50 feet on the streets of this community is a camera.
As a camera.
It's like, what has happened to the world? Now, yes, we get good traffic reports now, and we know when there's yellow or green. And yes, if someone gets mugged, maybe we have a photograph. But everything we're doing outside of our bedroom, and maybe even outside of our office, if we're lucky, is being looked at by somebody 24/7. Google Earth.
But in Boston, at the marathon, they were happy those were there?
I agree. There's always
Very
an
happy they were
argument
there.
as to what they can create, but we're talking about privacy. What I'm saying is reasonable expectation of privacy. 20 years ago, you were worried when you went out on the street, if you even thought about it, that if you did something in public, the only one who would know about it might be the person passing by.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, someone sitting at City Hall or at the police station looking at a series of cameras can see everything that's going on. Now, does it help
Or
to
at the
turn
traffic desk.
I worry more about the average Joe citizen who has his camera and his phone. I don't worry about the government taking pictures of me making some kind of mistake on the street because all they do is Burt go over here, I do something idiotic on the street, he films it, puts it on his Facebook, which has like 40,000 likes, and all of a sudden I go viral. Look at that officer in Maui, the Taguma Watch.
Right.
Now, I'm pretty sure whoever created that fan page created a fan page as a form of harassment of targeting the officer. But again, it kind of backfired. It made him more popular,
But getting back to what Jeff was saying about, the NSA, tapping into the wire, Snowden actually letting everybody know from a whistleblower standpoint that this is what's happening, and Chris saying that he's not surprised. Granted, we may not be surprised, but we still should be outraged because we should not let that happen. And I think the people need to know that they need to fight for their privacy.
And yet there's a side of me that says, look, if I'm a cop, right? And I'm worried, and the big crime I'm worried about is we had one 13 years ago where 3,000 people died in a couple of towers, and you're trying to stop that from happening again. By golly, I want to know where, if there's information available where I can find out that somebody is sort of in a cohort of people who may be terrorists, I want that information, don't I?
You can live in the George Orwell world of 1984.
Hey, we're in the
because
George
that's where
Orwell,
we're
aren't
in.
we?
We're in. When
Jeff?
he wrote it, people went, this only happens in totalitarian governments. It'll never happen here. What we have now in this country, and I understand how national security is paramount, believe me, we can debate that as well. But what we have, George Orwell figured out decades ago what we are now.
Yeah,
we're in a government, we're in a society where everything we do is being watched by Big Brother.
That's been the balancing act from the get-go. This is a balancing act, and Jeff is exactly right to say that the balancing act has been overtaken by technology. The balancing act has always been between our need to protect ourselves through our government against breaches in the law, including terrorism and our need to protect a certain level of privacy and expectation that our government will not abuse its information and position to downtrodden citizens. Now, look, let's face it. If we had a government and an NSA that could do whatever the heck they wanted to, and maybe they have that right now, or at least they're doing it, there's no question that it has a law enforcement benefit. There's no question that maybe somebody would get caught somewhere or some incident would be protected or prevented. That's, I don't think, the issue because the benefit is granted, but there's something that goes with that. There's a very heavy price to pay. No more privacy for anybody, fishing expeditions, criminal prosecution, misuse of personal information by government and private companies, and I think that balance is a little getting a little eroded right now.
Burt, Jim Mavia, Cover It Live, wants to know, what effect will government surveillance have on society? Will it inhibit the free flow of thoughts and ideas? Will it hurt the growth of digital modes of communication by making people afraid to use it? Do you think it will?
I think that right now, because of what is happening with the NSA and the fact that the light has been shown on them through Snowden's whistleblowing, and all the companies that were sort of presented in the Prism presentation, which include Microsoft, Google, Apple, all have come out and said, we deny any backdooring allowed to the NSA. Okay, so on one level, you have a presentation that says this is what we're getting. We're getting backdoor information from all these companies, from an internal source. And then on the other hand, you have all the companies saying that we do not have access, we don't give the access to the NSA. In fact, today in The Guardian, there was an article that was also released by Snowden and then it showed that Microsoft has acknowledged that they have worked with the NSA. So here's, on one hand, their denial of working with the NSA, and then actual admission of working with the NSA. So now, who do you trust? Who do you trust? So in terms of your question about, is this going to hamper, I think, sort of the use of all these social media technologies and online technologies? Yeah, I think people are going to be a little bit wary about, who's recording my Skype call. Remember, Skype is owned by Microsoft.
Don't they have applications and programs to make one anonymous when they go online? They might start going that route. Start using encryption might be going more mainstream than only the really geeks will use.
The thing is, you're talking about the NSA. These guys are not novices at decrypting encryption. These guys are the masters. Right. I mean, they're going to be looking at the ones that are encrypting their communications.
So best not to encrypt.
Here's the first hint. Don't encrypt.
Don't encrypt.
Go straight.
Because if I know your encryption, what are you hiding?
Yeah.
So
right.
then
Here's a very real example of the question that was just asked. We were joking about this outside, or at least I was, and like anybody else, I have a location setting on my phone. Well, I leave that sucker off nowadays. It's not that I particularly care if anybody knows where I am. I just don't want to get followed around on my location. I don't even know if it works. I don't know if my phone has some secret location setting thing. Now that's a hassle. Every time I want to locate, I have to turn it on.
I just
but
put wrong
to me,
location.
it's just like a beacon all the time.
Well, if we extend this Orwellian sort of society that we're now entering into, and look at the technologies that are available via drones, and if you have drones going into Egypt and picking people out, why not have that happen here? Right? I mean, you got a phone, you got a geolocation.
It might be happening right now.
So that's the fear, right? The technology is made.
A camera in your bathroom and a drone coming at your locator on your phone.
There's got to be
You're
somewhere.
in deep trouble.
There's got to be somewhere, somehow in my life that I can do what I want and nobody will know what's happening.
In your bedroom, if you're lucky.
And close the drape. Privacy tools like encryption are available but cumbersome. Will Prism make it work for the mainstream? Some guy named Ryan from Mililani via Twitter. Is that somebody you know?
I think I know who that might be.
Yeah.
Yes,
What does that mean? That's a very technical question. I don't know what's Prism.
Well, Prism is the technology that Snowden revealed as being the way, or actually it was the code name for this particular sort of wiretapping. I like to think of it as a wiretap. Now, nobody really knows exactly how they're getting the data from Google, Microsoft, Apple. Some people say that they have a backdoor into the systems. Some people surmise that whenever there's a company like a Google who is got a data center full of servers, those servers need to be communicated with via a communication line. This communication line has to exit the data center and go into an internet hub. And there's major internet hubs that are cross connects for transporting this data all across the world. Now, if you were able to isolate that fiber and take a feed off of that fiber, basically sniffing that fiber, that's what Prism is. And that's why they call it Prism. It's taking a fiber and basically bending it and getting a feed from the data coming off of that fiber.
So it's a wiretap.
I knew that.
So you're getting Snowden is getting the data. The NSA is getting the data while he's in transit. Who's to say they didn't get it from a stored archive site?
Well, so we're not, nobody really knows because NSA hasn't come out and said, this is how we do.
So after all this thing about privacy and how about the government is lying to us, we're going to wait for the NSA to come out and tell us what they actually done?
Well, to answer the question, I mean, we're just trying to see what is it that the technology that they use to actually get the data. The bottom line is that they got the data.
It's the modern, but you're right, it's the modern day equivalent of a wiretap.
Yeah.
And for wiretaps, you're supposed to be
Yeah.
able to demonstrate a reason for wiretapping, a specific reason, and some independent.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that. But if you have a FISA order that allows you to go in
Now,
and
FISA is that court,
Here's
right?
the point. That's the
But
problem.
you know what? If I was watching this program, I would not be all that concerned about what the government might get by, for example, getting information on cell phones. What we don't understand is how much of our everyday life is now sitting somewhere in corporate America. That's what I would be worried about. That every time I buy a pair of shoes, if it's black versus brown, it's going down somewhere, and if someone knows how to get it, not just the store, it can go somewhere. If I buy a Buick versus a Toyota.
Yeah, but why would you be worried about Google selling you an ad because they know some information about you versus the government who might now decide terrorism is the main driver for
Because
all this
I'm not
surveillance?
concerned
But then what
about-
if they change that to something else? What if they change that to, who's talked to China or Russia? I mean, I've heard senators refer to China and Russia as enemies.
But in my everyday life, I'm not talking to anybody in China or Russia.
Well, it's your everyday life, but we have students who we had them on the show yesterday. They win contests. There's a group out of Hilo that won a contest. They're now going to Russia to compete in the finals. I mean, what happens when we start to sort of paint this picture that the Russians and the Chinese are enemies, and any communications that happens with those countries now are potential for enemy agents.
I got to get this guy. Do you have any regrets that the Patriot Act opened up, with this new technology, has opened up a can of worms, and really with a lot of big worms that could cause us great trouble? I mean, we're talking about Orwellian. Orwell's off the shelves now, in the few bookstores we have left. Thanks to you electronic guys.
Certainly. I think that as I hoped and believed and as it was represented to me, it would all turn out in terms of the balancing act that I talked about earlier. I think that balancing act has not been correctly followed. And let's remember, first of all, let's just get the facts straight. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is apparently how these programs have been authorized, has been on the books for a long, long time. This isn't something recent. The Patriot Act was enacted, of course, in 2001, 2002, somewhere in that range. And the vote I took that you referred to earlier was to continue the Patriot Act, strengthening the civil rights side of it, and introducing a much more protective FISA court to oversee this intelligence. So the deal was, okay, we understand we're in an international terrorism world. We know we need new forms of law enforcement, but the old rules still should apply. And the rules are, you got to have a good solid reason. There should be some independent people in there looking over the government's shoulders. And I think that that's what I think didn't work out. And that's, frankly, the problem.
Chris, please, somebody else asked this question or a similar question directed to you. Please comment on the idea that the Kremlin is talking about doing away with computers and using typewriters. Does that make sense?
Going retro. They're going retro with the technology because everybody's advancing. Go to a technology that's kind of archaic. If I send Jeff here that letter, if he needs to share it, he needs to digitize it and take a little extra step. If I send him an electronic letter, an email, it's much quicker and faster and has a greater impact. So going back to paper and pencil is much be safer. Going back to digital, okay, we get digital dollars, okay? How about going back to regular coin, coin and cash currency? Because he looks at the dollar and he looks at the coins, that's great. Electronic, where's the money at? It's something like Burt was saying, it's just molecules and atoms and so forth. It's nothing tangible.
Boy, it's like trying to grab air, isn't it? Trying to grab air. Comment and questions. It's not about privacy. The real problem is that the pieces are being put in place for a police state takeover. What can we do to stop this? What can be done to stop this?
Well,
you don't see a police state.
No, I mean, I think that's a little bit of an overstatement, but I don't argue that we're moving in that direction. I don't think we'll ever get there. I think there are still enough people fighting for civil liberties, and we still have lots of good judges and others in Congress and in the state legislatures who will do everything they can to make sure that we don't get there. But one would be foolish to say, compare 20 years ago with today and say we haven't moved significantly in that direction.
If you brought up those black shoes or brown shoes and corporate America finds out, all of us are sending things somewhere or another or buying or whatever. Paul and Hilo wants to know, aren't the users he's using social media, Facebook and Twitter, or you and I buying black or brown shoes or whatever, aren't we, by doing that, giving our consent and giving up our privacy in a very meaningful way?
I think we started the show by talking about what can people think now is their reasonable expectation of privacy, when for a large portion of the population, and almost everyone under 30, their lives are constantly involved in giving up their privacy on Facebook and Twitter.
We are our worst enemy. We're giving it up.
My daughter puts on Facebook everything she's doing. She lives in another country, and it's like, why would you say last night we had lobster for dinner?
And then she expects some privacy now.
It's like, okay.
So the idea of privacy, I think, is somewhat subjective, right? So if we all went around the table and said, what do you define privacy as? I think we probably all have a different answer. But if you do any kind of social media, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Google+, what you put on those social media sites are pretty much public. Forget about it, don't even think about it being part of your privacy or something that you want to protect from anybody else. Okay, so that was not the purpose of those particular sites. If you wanted to be private about it, don't go onto those sites and don't post your things. But the understanding is that if you are going to participate in a social media kind of environment, you're putting it out there for the public, and that's fine.
But when you talk about retro things, or many of the things that we can do in life, we have to give up our privacy to the internet and to cyberspace, whether we like it or not. Buying our shoes, banking.
Well, I think here's the point, though. Everything nowadays involves that. Everything. I had a great conversation with our kids the other day, and the basic question was, what if I didn't want to give anybody any information about myself? What would I have to do? Turn off my phone.
Yeah.
Order nothing on a computer. Turn off my computer. Stay in my bedroom, I guess, according to Jeff.
Because your kids will give you up.
But it's a serious question, and that's the problem here. Is that yeah, okay, Paul is correct that in buying online, I am sanctioning. I don't think I can buy online nowadays without giving them some information that they can use, first of
Right.
all.
I mean, the bank has to verify that you are
And so,
who
and
you
so,
are.
and we could enact laws that provided a much clearer understanding of what happened in that situation, but we haven't. And
But
I
Ed, the
think
question is, where does it go after that? I mean, I can understand when you go online and you buy a pair of shoes that you're going to put down your name, address, and your shoe size and, relevant information.
card
But you would hope and expect, it's not true, but you would hope and expect that that information remains between you and the retailer. The problem is, from what I hear from many seminars I've been to with experts like you gentlemen, is that that is foolish to think that, because it immediately is cockroached by all kinds of other entities, other businesses. It's sold
Well, so
by
I think-
government if it thinks it's important information that it needs. So that's where I think the issue is.
Certain items too that, I'm putting myself in Jeff's position when buying shoes. Okay, I have an expectation of privacy for my credit card and the CCS number and the security numbers, my address, my phone numbers. But that's my size, my shoe size, the color, and my preference, and the style. I don't care, who sees that. But there's certain information that I feel should be private. And so when we talk about privacy, we cannot say that, we cannot use it as an all-encompassing. We have to be specific as what we consider private. Our email is private. My social posting is not private. Right. Okay, my pictures, my photo album in Flickr is private or public, but my email picture that I send you guys is private. So there's different things and different items and different information that each individual will have an expectation of privacy,
The state Senate
and it's
thought-
different from each individual.
So the point is that there is information that we're sending out to our social media companies or whether we're buying stuff on Amazon that allows them to put an ad on our on our site, potentially sell us something because we bought a shoe, and for all intents and purposes that's okay. Where it starts to get really dangerous is that if now as a public we have felt that our privacy is something that we easily give away, and now when we take it to the next level, when the NSA is now wiretapping information off of servers coming out of Google, Amazon, and others, and we accept it as being something that is just the normal
But I'm
way of
using
doing
the
business,
shoe. I'm
that is
using the shoe.
wrong. That
I'm
is
using
wrong.
the shoe as such a simple device, but if you buy drugs on the internet, if you look on the internet to do research on something that may not be socially acceptable, do you have a right to know that that's just between you and your own computer?
No,
or that someone
right.
knows that you went on and looked at sex with pigs?
No, I agree with you. I agree.
mean,
And that's why.
do you have a
yeah.
reasonable expectation that if you're sitting at home tonight and you want to go on the internet and you want to look up sites dealing with sex with pigs, that by tomorrow morning, someone else is going to know that you did that?
Exactly.
I'm sorry you brought that up, Jeff.
I
I
know,
visit
I-
that site a great
was
deal.
looking at something that I know you would
I'm
feel
from the
in your heart.
Midwest, a farm boy, that's, you had to bring something like that. But I'm glad we got off of shoes. I was going to say, let's go to red wine, or something like that. If technology is outpacing the law in this area, how do we close or at least lessen that gap? Industry standards, government regulations, regulation, evolution through litigation. Sarah wants to know from Cover It Live. If you could have some law, are there laws you'd like to see? Chris?
Not really.
You think we have enough?
I think you just need to update the laws. But by the time working with
You'll never catch up. Chris.
looking at
The law
politicians,
will never
because
catch up.
the time it takes to create the laws and get it implemented, there'll be new technology.
That's exactly right.
There'll be new
What people
technology.
need to do is be vigilant about the laws that do start to invade on your privacy. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a House Bill 2288, which was going to mandate that this is locally, our ISPs were going to collect all the websites that we would visit over the course of the previous 2 years, and they would collect that and archive it so that law enforcement could go in and look at where potential sites were visited because of some criminal justification. Now, what people have to do is they have to be vigilant about those kinds of bills being proposed and go out there and testify against them, because we can't let those kinds of bills be turned into law.
There's a lot of socially accepted crime in our community, sports betting, etc. What's to stop the government from focusing its all-seeing eye on those sorts of activities? Barney, my bookie, called that question into you. Could that happen? Not under the Patriot Act, could it?
Well, apparently, yes. I mean,
Social, like sports betting?
well, they're on a fishing expedition, okay? They're not targeted on finding the sports betting. But along the way, they just so happen to notice the sports betting. Now, what happens then?
They'll pass it on to the
Did they have...
particular agency that will investigate the sports betting.
That's a little bit of a danger in a fishing expedition.
Because according to the Patriot Act, you can share information and intelligence depending on what, and send it to the appropriate agency to further investigation.
Jeff, somebody wants to know, what do you think of Congress not bringing charges against the NSA for lying to them?
I think that's reality. I hate to be so cynical. I mean, Congress is being lied to every day by various governmental agencies, and we don't know about it until someone exposes it. Then there's the reaction that there is. I don't think that you can expect that Congress would bring contempt charges against the NSA or any other government agency. I think that's just the reality. I think you just have to hope that wrongdoing is exposed and that people react appropriately to the wrongdoing. Now, looking at the polls, the majority of the country is not bothered by the disclosures that the NSA has accumulated all of this cell phone data, because they are convinced in their minds at this moment that it's protecting them from some kind of foreign terrorism. The reality is, if you look at the facts, there has been a single foreign terrorism attack in the United States 14 years ago. All other so-called terrorism attacks have been domestic. Now, when the NSA comes out after this disclosure and says, as they have, that we have prevented 50 foreign terrorism attacks on American soil, I just leave it for individuals to decide whether they want to accept that explanation or not.
Do you accept it?
No.
I don't either. Do you accept it?
Well, okay, so I want to say something about you're right. And, when people start to accept that if Clapper goes in front of the Congress and says, NSA, we know nothing about collecting data on our citizenry, that's outright perjury. Now, if that's a reality that we accept, then we've basically drunk the Kool-Aid, and we've accepted these kinds of lies that will continue to erode what we consider to be our privacy.
But in the name of security, Ed, isn't it true that even the congressmen have to take an oath that they don't tell what they know about some of these national security?
That's absolutely right. And members of Congress have a top secret security clearance and get confidential briefings and cannot reveal that information under penalty of law. And I made decisions in Congress that were based on the information that I had, that I couldn't share, and that I had to defend. That's part of the job.
But then, Ed, and I understand and agree with it completely, but then why ask the question?
Well,
if members of Congress know that there's an issue about whether disclosures of certain information can be made, how can that member of Congress, in a public hearing, ask the director of the NSA, are you listening in on our phone conversations?
Right. Well, I think
and the answer of the NSA guy was, what did you want me to say?
Yeah,
exactly.
You've seen his explanation now.
So
I couldn't say yes, so I had to
So
say
you
no.
wonder why the public doesn't trust government, because they're lying and we have to accept it.
Well, I think unfortunately to some extent we do have to trust our members of Congress to make the right decisions in these situations, and based on the information that they have, which is not available to the rest of the country by and large in this area. And frankly, I don't think we and they have have made the right decisions. And that's what's troubling me right now, is that there is no question, again, that our government needs access to what any of us would concede is very private information for law enforcement and protection, terrorism, prevention purposes. No question at all. It just has to be the right system of checks and balances, and I think that's where we're getting off track.
And that's that position. You agree with that position?
I just want to respond to you. Obama, who is considered to be far more liberal and a fan of civil libertarianism than Bush,
Right.
has created an environment where anyone who dares to expose the spying and surveillance that's going on is being prosecuted by the Justice Department.
And that's a great
including the
disappointment.
media representatives who are alleged to be complicit. So you talk about what the country should do. You have a president who's considered far more liberal than his predecessor, who has brought far more prosecutions against those who are allegedly exposing what's going on and hindering our national security. That maybe gives you an indication
I
of what
agree.
the politics are.
Right, I agree.
I come from a country that was under military control. The United States is supposed to be the land of the free. That is why I live here, but I think that it is an illusion. Snowden has caused public discourse and has done a great service for this country. Now we are addressing the issues and have panels like this one. I understand security after 9/11 and mining data, but up to what point? If it's between selling out our personal privacy and security, I'd rather take the chance. Can we trust the government to use our information safely? Why is it that I trust them? You don't trust them. You know all the stuff. You know this stuff. You don't trust them. I trust them.
Have you ever heard of anybody?
I'll accept it. If you want to say you're old and stupid, Dan, that's all right. I'll accept that. But
Just the old part.
Have you ever heard of anybody getting put in jail for being falsely accused?
yeah, sure.
Well, that's what you need to be fearful of. If people can now take data that you were previously thinking was private and now construct a story that perhaps would, make it seem like you're doing some kind of conversation with the Russians, God forbid, that could potentially put you into jail. And if you're in jail and now there's no a defense that you can use to get out, and you're stuck, just like like the prisoners in Guantanamo. I mean, you need to worry about that.
I have taught now 3 times in the last 5 years in Eastern Europe at law schools. Just came back from Poland. I've also taught in Estonia and Hungary. And what I hear from these very bright, very capable young students who are now living in democracies for the first time, but whose parents lived under totalitarian rule, is hypocrisy in America. You have told us for so long that you are a free, independent democracy where people's individual rights are not trampled by the government. And then we read about all of these things happening in your country when you criticized our country for doing the same things that you're doing now, maybe a little bit more overt. It's a very interesting dialogue to get into with people who have grown up in totalitarian governments and now, like your last caller, talk about what is America going towards as far as democracy. It's certainly much better than many other countries, but is it the image that we try to portray? Is that the reality?
Chris, as somebody who was doing this kind of work for the police department for so long, have you ever used the internet to catch criminals and snoop on people?
Be careful, Chris.
Yeah. How do you define snoop?
Okay, Snoop, with the court orders, I would get probable cause, get a subpoena, search warrant, have it reviewed by the prosecutors or the U.S. Attorney General, have a judge sign it, and then get the information I need. If it has a wiretap, so be it. If it's to get archive records, getting a search warrant to get the contents of an email, ISP records. I've done it before, and I'm still doing it now. And it's all. In fact, I'm doing one case right now, and one of the things I'm working on is I'm writing up a letter of record retention, and I have to serve a subpoena for some of the records, and I need a search warrant for the contents of those records. Okay? Technically, I can get those records without any court order, but then I would be violating a crime, not only a state crime, but a federal crime.
Are the internet providers or companies responsible for informing users of the extent to which their communications are private or not private? Is that the law? It must be.
Are they responsible for? I don't think they're
Redefined
responsible.
They're not.
No. We can file law enforcement can put in a non-disclosure clause in when you're obtaining a court order, even like for financial records. We could put an addendum to the subpoena or the search warrant, says not to notify the account holder for a period of time. And if I recall, that has to be reapplied for after so many days.
You know that user agreement
Right.
that scrolls down that's written in print that no one can possibly read? Read it.
Last comment from Paul. Will this horrific overreach by the government cause people to congregate in small groups and engage in friendly, jovial conversation face-to-face over food and drink?
Like this?
Oh, the humanity.
Only in their bedrooms.
A great pleasure. Thank you all for coming. Next week at Insights, we'll ask the question, is an independent Native Hawaiian government within reach? To date, no sovereignty effort has managed to truly galvanize the Native Hawaiian population. But now, armed with the state's approval, the Native Hawaiian Roll Commission has high hopes that will change. But the commission is falling far short of its goal of signing up 200,000 eligible Hawaiians to help establish an independent government. Will a 6-month extension bring Native Hawaiians closer to self-governance? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Dan Boylan. A hui hou.